I still remember the silence before it happened. It wasn't the kind of silence that calms you, it was the kind that presses in, thick and suffocating, just before something breaks. It was the day I told my stepfather no. My name is Liana Mercer, and this story began when I turned 19. Up until that point, I had lived most of my life in a state of quiet endurance, never quite free, never quite broken, but always watching my back. My biological father, Daniel Mercer, passed away when I was 17. A quiet man with rough hands and a soft voice, he'd worked as a mechanic in a small town outside Portland. He didn't leave behind mansions or companies, but he left me something far more powerful: protection. And when cancer took him, the world felt colder. He also left me something else. A trust. $180,000, set aside and locked in a protected account until my 19th birthday. It wasn't about the money for me, it was about his belief in my future. College, independence, freedom from everything I'd silently suffered through since my mother remarried. Because my mother, Evelyn, didn't stay alone for long. 6 months after Dad's funeral, she married Troy Benton, a man whose perfect smile could freeze your blood if you looked too close. He was charming in public, generous with strangers, and knew how to say just the right thing at dinner parties. But behind closed doors, that charm vanished. Troy saw me as a burden. A reminder of the man my mother had loved before him. He never said it outright, but I felt it in his cold stares, his dismissive tone, and the way he constantly hinted that I owed my mother for putting up with me. Worse, he brought his son Kyle into our home, a smug, entitled 22-year-old who spent most of his days gaming, complaining about how the world owed him more, and networking with people who always seemed just as aimless as him. They made it clear I was an outsider in my own home. So I kept to myself. Studied. Worked part-time. Waited until the trust unlocked and I could escape. And finally, that day came. On the morning of my 19th birthday, I sat quietly at the kitchen table, reading through the confirmation email from the trust lawyer. The funds were now mine to manage. My heart fluttered with nervous joy. It wasn't just about financial freedom, it was about finally leaving. I hadn't told anyone. But I should have known better than to think secrets stayed hidden long in a house like ours. That night, Troy called me into the living room. Kyle was already seated on the recliner, one ankle crossed over his knee, a smirk playing on his lips like he knew something I didn't. My mother wasn't home, working a late shift at the hospital, as usual. That left me alone with the wolves. "Have a seat," Troy said, motioning to the couch. I sat. He leaned forward, clasping his hands like a therapist on TV. "We need to talk about your trust fund." My heart dropped. I blinked, trying to stay neutral. "What about it?" Troy's smile thinned. "You're a bright girl. But let's be honest, you've lived under this roof for free for years. We've supported you. Fed you. Sheltered you. It's only fair you give a little back." I felt my spine stiffen. That money was from my dad. For my future. He raised an eyebrow. "And what about Kyle's future?" My eyes flicked to him. He shrugged, as if the whole conversation bored him. "You're sitting on a pile of money," Troy continued, voice sharpening. "Kyle needs funding for his startup. He's got big ideas. With the right support, he could be the next tech giant." I stared. He dropped out of community college twice. Troy's tone turned icy. "Watch it." "No," I said, my voice clear, calm. "I'm not handing over my inheritance. That money is mine." The room chilled. Troy stood slowly, the smile gone now. His eyes narrowed. "After everything we've done for you," he hissed, "you stand there and say no?" "I didn't ask for your help," I replied. "And you've never treated me like family." And that's when it happened. In the blink of an eye, his hand shot forward, grabbing a fistful of my hair. I screamed, the sharp yank sending pain shooting through my scalp as I tumbled backward. My head slammed into the corner of the wall. The crack of it echoed through the room. My vision blurred, stars flashing in the corners of my sight. Blood trickled from my scalp, warm and terrifying. I collapsed to the floor, my legs folding under me like paper. He stood over me, breath ragged, face twisted. "You will regret this," he spat. I gasped, reaching for the armrest to push myself up, but my limbs were trembling. Kyle stood frozen behind him, eyes wide but saying nothing. Troy paced, muttering, swearing, finally turning to me again. "You tell your mother, and I swear I'll." He didn't finish the sentence. I was already crawling to the hallway, hand trembling as I pulled my phone from my pocket. I could barely think. My fingers slipped across the screen. I didn't call the police. I called Aunt Nina. My father's sister. The only one who had ever said, "If anything happens, you call me, no matter what." I barely whispered the words, "He hurt me." And she answered with steel, "Where are you?" I made it out of the house minutes later. My scalp still bleeding, my head pounding, my breath ragged. I stumbled across the lawn like a ghost. The porch lights flicked on next door. Mrs. Halberd, our neighbor, gasped and ran toward me. And then everything went black. I woke in the hospital hours later. The first face I saw wasn't a doctor. It was Aunt Nina's. Eyes fierce. Voice gentle. "You're safe now." And I knew, in that moment, nothing would ever be the same. The beeping machines were a quiet metronome, each pulse reminding me that I was still alive. The ceiling tiles of the hospital room blurred and swam in my vision as I blinked slowly, pain throbbing at the back of my head like a drumbeat. The antiseptic smell burned my nostrils. My scalp was tender, wrapped in gauze, and I could still feel the phantom sensation of Troy's fist yanking my hair. It felt unreal, like a fever dream. Except I had the stitches to prove it wasn't. Aunt Nina sat beside me, her arms folded tightly across her chest. She looked like she hadn't moved in hours. Her dark, curly hair was pinned back in its usual no-nonsense way, and her eyes, fierce and brilliant, fixed on me the second I stirred. "Liana," she said softly, placing a hand on my arm. "You're okay. You're safe now." Safe. The word sounded foreign in my ears. I swallowed against the dryness in my throat. "How did you?" "You called me," she said. Barely got the words out. "Mrs. Halberd found you unconscious on the lawn. She called 911 and then me." I closed my eyes, memories rushing in like floodwater, the living room, the rage in Troy's face, the way Kyle just stood there, watching, frozen. Then something else occurred to me. "Mom," I whispered. "She's still with him." Nina's expression hardened. Not for long. Before I could ask what that meant, the door opened. And my mother walked in. She looked like she had aged a decade overnight. Her scrubs were still on, slightly wrinkled. Her makeup was smeared. Her face was pale. Her eyes, though, those soft green eyes I used to remember tucking me in at night, were wide with guilt and something deeper. Horror. "Liana." Her voice cracked. "Oh my God." She rushed to the side of the bed, nearly knocking over the fourth stand in her haste. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know it had gotten that bad. I didn't know what to say. Because that sentence. It didn't land right. You didn't know he hated me?" I rasped. "You didn't know he's been trying to control me for years?" She faltered, glancing toward Nina. She didn't want to see it, Nina cut in sharply, standing now. Because if she did, she'd have to admit she married a man who treats her daughter like an obstacle. "Don't do this now," Mom said weakly. "No. Do it now," I whispered, sitting up slowly despite the pain. "Because I can't pretend anymore." "I won't." Mom looked like she'd been slapped. "Liana, I thought you two were just struggling to adjust. I thought you were exaggerating. You'd never said." I was screaming without words. "Mom," I said, my voice trembling. "I stayed quiet because I didn't want to be the problem. Because every time I came to you with something, you brushed it off as me being dramatic. You chose to believe him over me." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Nina stepped between us, more composed than either of us. "You want to make it right, Evelyn? Then don't go back to that house. Don't let that man near Liana again. Not now, not ever. My mom nodded quickly, still crying. I already left. I grabbed a few things and told him I wasn't coming back. When I saw the blood on Liana's head, I knew. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. For the first time in a long time, I believed her. Maybe not fully, but enough. Later that evening, a detective named Sergeant Dawson came to speak with us. A calm woman in her 50s with a voice like smooth gravel, she asked me to recount everything. I did. Every word. Every threat. Every insult. Every instance of Troy trying to control my money, my life, my freedom. I even told her about Kyle. How involved was he? Sergeant Dawson asked. He didn't touch me, I said. But he knew. He didn't stop it. And he was part of the pressure. He wanted the money too. That was enough. You're brave, she said quietly after the interview. Most girls freeze. You ran. I didn't feel brave. I felt broken. But her words mattered. By the next morning, I was discharged under medical supervision, with instructions to avoid stress, loud sounds, and strenuous activity for at least a week. Nina drove me to her home, a cozy bungalow filled with warm lights, soft blankets, and the smell of cinnamon tea. A haven. Mom didn't come with us that day. She had something else to do. I need to file for divorce, she said, standing outside the hospital entrance. And press charges. I want to do this right. Then go, Nina said. But don't just talk. Do it. I will, she promised. The next 72 hours were a blur. The police arrived at Troy's house with a warrant. They arrested him on charges of assault, attempted fraud, and financial coercion. The photos of my injury and the hospital records sealed the case. Kyle, meanwhile, was detained later for conspiracy. He'd sent emails to his dad outlining how they'd convince Liana to hand it over, and worse, joking about drugging her if needed. It wasn't just manipulation. It was premeditated. The betrayal was sharp. But the justice? Sharper. Nina stood by my side through every statement. Every phone call. Every moment I thought I'd fall apart again. You are not what happened to you, she told me once. You are what you choose to become after. The charges stuck. The court date was set. My mother kept her promise. She cut ties. Hired a lawyer. Stood beside me, trembling but firm. And slowly, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, this nightmare would end. One night, as I sat on the porch of Nina's house, wrapped in a blanket and staring at the stars, my phone buzzed. A message from my trust lawyer. White check mark emoji. Your fund is now fully transferred and secured under your sole authority. No outside party has access. I stared at the message. Then I cried. Not because I finally had the money. But because I finally had control. Control of my future. Of my peace. Of my name. 2 months later, I stood outside the courthouse, the morning air crisp and charged with quiet electricity. The building loomed above me, gray stone and steel, like the final boss in a video game I never asked to play. I stared up at it and wondered how many people had walked in scared out of their minds but walked out finally free. Was today going to be my day? Aunt Nina stood beside me, dressed in a charcoal blazer and boots that could crush egos. She looked more like a lawyer than half the ones inside. And honestly, she should have been. Her arm wrapped around mine, grounding me. You don't have to be afraid of him anymore, she said, her voice calm and steady. Today, he answers to you. I nodded, swallowing the hard knot that had built in my throat. No matter how much I told myself I was ready, part of me still shook. Because inside that building was Troy. And I had to look him in the eyes again. The courtroom was colder than I expected, sterile, quiet, with the kind of silence that makes your stomach twist. My mother sat behind me, not in the family section, but right next to the victim's bench. She had made her choice. Troy entered wearing a navy suit that didn't fit quite right anymore. Maybe he lost weight, Or maybe he just didn't look as powerful when he wasn't yelling in his own living room. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on me. I didn't flinch. He smirked. I clenched my fists under the table. Kyle followed next, looking like a child who got caught stealing from a candy store. His head was down. No smugness now. No jokes. Just fear. Good. The trial began. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Ramirez, presented everything with surgical precision. First, the medical evidence. Photos of my bruised scalp. The concussion report. The stitches. The emergency room staff statement. Then came the audio recordings. My mother had started documenting her own suspicions in the weeks after the hospital visit, secret phone recordings, voicemails, even Kyle's emails that had been recovered from a shared account. The jury sat in silence as one of the recordings played aloud. Troy's voice, "She'll give in eventually. If she doesn't, we'll find another way. Kyle should have just taken her phone and locked her in her room." The words hung in the air like poison. I felt the room shift. Heads turned. Eyes narrowed. Then came my turn. I took the stand. My palms were sweaty, and my knees felt like water, but I sat tall. And I told them everything. From the moment my father passed. To the way Troy slowly began tightening the leash. To the birthday night when the mask dropped, and he shoved me into a wall over money that never belonged to him. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I just told the truth. And that was enough. When the defense took their turn, they tried to spin it all. Troy's lawyer claimed I overreacted, that I misunderstood a father figure's concern. He tried to call me an ungrateful teenager. But Ms. Ramirez stood up and delivered the blow. "Mr. Benton did not act out of concern," she said. "He acted out of greed. He didn't protect Liana, he harmed her. And Kyle Benton, his adult son, not only enabled it, he encouraged it." Then she looked at the jury. "This is not a family disagreement. This is financial coercion, physical assault, and a betrayal of the most vile kind." The deliberation lasted 2 days. I barely slept. I walked the floor of Nina's guest room, my stomach a knot of nerves. My mother tried to soothe me. I appreciated the effort, but my heart was already hardened to whatever came. Then, on the third morning, the call came. The jury had reached a verdict. I walked back into the courtroom, my legs stiff, heart hammering against my ribs. Troy sat calmly, hands folded. Kyle fidgeted like a nervous child, his foot tapping endlessly. The judge entered. A tall woman with an expression carved from stone. The bailiff handed her the slip of paper. She read it silently. And then everything slowed down. In the matter of the state versus Troy Benton, on charges of aggravated assault, attempted financial fraud, and coercion, this court finds the defendant guilty on all counts. In the matter of the state versus Kyle Benton, on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, this court finds the defendant guilty. My ears rang. I stared ahead, frozen, until I realized Nina's hand was on my back, steadying me. Troy didn't flinch. But I saw it, the slight tremble in his fingers. The tightness around his mouth. The loss of control. The judge continued, her voice even, her words final. Troy Benton is hereby sentenced to 20 years in state prison. Kyle Benton is sentenced to 5 years, with the possibility of parole in 3. The gavel dropped. And so did the weight on my chest. As the courtroom emptied, Troy was led away in cuffs. His eyes locked with mine one last time. Hatred. Spite. And something else, powerlessness. I didn't look away. Because that's what freedom looks like. He was no longer the shadow in my doorway. He was a chapter, clothed. Kyle was escorted next, his eyes down, face pale. He never said a word. And I didn't need him to. Outside the courthouse, the wind hit my face like a second breath. Reporters gathered at the steps, shouting questions. My mother pulled me close, but Nina stepped forward and said it for all of us. Justice was served today. That's all that matters. I looked up at the sky. The clouds were clearing. It didn't mean everything was healed. But it meant I could finally begin. The morning after the verdict, I woke up in Aunt Nina's guest room to sunlight pouring through the curtains. For the first time in months, the light didn't sting my eyes, it warmed my skin. I wasn't used to peace. Even in silence, my body had always been on high alert, waiting for slammed doors, veiled threats, or the passive-aggressive jabs that chipped away at my self-worth. But now, it was quiet. And it wasn't terrifying. It was peaceful. That morning, Nina made pancakes and played Motown on the old kitchen radio. My mother sat at the table, still in her robe, holding a mug of coffee like it was a life preserver. We barely spoke, just exchanged tired smiles. There was nothing left to say about the past. Now we had to talk about the future. I spent the next few weeks recalibrating. It's strange how, after surviving a storm, the calm can be disorienting. You'd think freedom would feel like fireworks, but in reality, it's a quiet thing. A slow breath. A steady heartbeat. I used part of my trust to find a small studio apartment about 30 minutes away. It wasn't glamorous, bare walls, second-hand furniture, a kitchen the size of a shoebox, but it was mine. No stepbrother loitering in the hall. No man slamming cabinets in passive-aggressive anger. Just space. Just me. The first night I slept there, the only sound was my ceiling fan. I lay awake for hours, not because I was scared, but because I couldn't believe I was finally safe. College started a month later. I enrolled in a digital media program, something I'd always wanted to do but never dared say out loud when Troy and Kyle were around. They used to mock art degrees, calling them worthless and soft. But in my heart, storytelling was everything. I wanted to take the pain I had known and turn it into something more than trauma, into power. My professors were kind. My classmates quirky and smart. For the first time, I walked into a room and didn't feel like I had to shrink. I didn't sit by the door anymore in case I needed to leave quickly. I existed. I made friends. Real ones. And even though it scared me, I let people in. Bit by bit. My mother started her own version of healing, too. She filed for her name change, dropping Benton entirely. She got a job at a women's shelter, one where she now used her nursing background to help victims of domestic abuse. It was hard for her at first. Guilt clung to her like smoke. Sometimes she'd call me just to say she was sorry again. But I always told her the same thing. You believed him, Mom. But now you believe me. That's what matters. One day, she gave me an envelope. Inside was a photo of me at age 9, gap-toothed, holding a stray kitten I'd found in our backyard. On the back, she had written, "I should have protected this girl. But now I'll protect the woman she became." I cried when I read that. Not because I was sad. But because, for the first time, she saw me. I also started therapy. At first, I hated it. I didn't want to rehash the past, peel back wounds that had only just started to scab. But my therapist, a woman named Tara, had a gift. She didn't prod, she invited. She let me uncoil slowly. We talked about everything. The fear. The silence. The guilt for not standing up sooner. The anger at Kyle's smirk. The self-doubt that lingered like smoke in my lungs. "You're not broken," she told me once. "You were trapped. But you kept the flame alive. That's not weakness, that's survival." Those words stayed with me. The apartment became a canvas of healing. I painted the walls a deep green, the color of peace. I hung up fairy lights and stuck little affirmations on my mirror. You are not what they did to you. Freedom looks good on you. You didn't survive to stay silent. One night, while journaling on my bed, I realized something profound. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. I used to think I'd never stop hating Troy or resenting Kyle. But hate is heavy. And I was tired of carrying their weight on my back. So I set it down. Not for them, for me. Then came the message. It was a DM on Instagram from someone I didn't know. Hey, I saw your court case online. I think what you did was brave. I'm in a similar situation. I don't know what to do. My fingers hovered over the reply button. And something in me shifted. I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to reach back. That night, I opened a new account. At Voices, Uncaged. A safe space for survivors. A digital journal for girls, and boys, like me. For people who've been gaslit, silenced, minimized, and made to feel like their pain was too messy for the world. I posted short essays. Quotes from therapy. Voice notes. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of messages. Dozens of comments. Some people simply wrote, "Thank you." Others poured their hearts out. And for every one of them, I replied. I didn't have all the answers. But I had been there. And that was enough. One evening, I sat by my window, watching the city lights blink away. A cup of tea in my hands. My laptop on my knees. The newest post on Voices Uncaged read. "You are not alone. They don't get the final word. You do. And this is only the beginning." The 1-year anniversary of the trial came and went like a quiet ripple across still water. I didn't mark it with anything dramatic. No candlelit vigil. No symbolic burning of old memories. Just a walk. A long, peaceful walk through the park, wind weaving through my hair, headphones in, the world soft around the edges. But inside me? A fire still burned. Not the kind that rages with anger or demands vengeance. That fire had cooled long ago. This one was different, steady, warm, bright. A fire that kept me standing when shadows stretched long. A fire that whispered, "You lived through it. Now live beyond it." Voices Uncaged had grown. What started as a private digital journal had evolved into a full-blown community, thousands of followers, weekly live streams, group chats, collaborations with therapists, lawyers, and women's shelters. It became a place for stories. For survival. For healing. And slowly, a new identity began to take shape. Not just Liana Mercer, the girl whose stepfather tried to steal her life. But Liana Mercer, advocate. Artist. Voice. Survivor. People started inviting me to speak. First online webinars. Then a local college event. Then a women's empowerment summit hosted by a nonprofit. I was terrified every time. But I showed up. Because if even one person in that room needed to hear that they weren't alone, then it was worth every shake in my voice. One afternoon, I got a handwritten letter in the mail. From Kyle. It was sent through a corrections system, the envelope stamped and screened. I stared at it for 3 days before opening it. Inside, his handwriting, slanted, messy, almost desperate. "Liana. I know you probably won't read this. And if you do, I don't expect forgiveness. I was wrong. I see that now. I let him control me too. I thought I was surviving, but all I was doing was hurting people who didn't deserve it. You were braver than me. You still are. I hope you're okay. Kyle." I didn't reply. Not because I was angry. But because some closure comes without words. My mother moved closer, just a 10-minute drive from my apartment. We still had moments where the past rose between us, ghost-like and cold, but we faced it together now. She still worked at the shelter, and the pride I felt watching her bloom into herself again was almost too big to carry. She wasn't perfect. Neither was I. But healing isn't about perfection. It's about choosing to show up anyway. One night, as summer folded into fall, I got a message from my trust lawyer. "Just a reminder, your father's final installment, $20,000, is scheduled to transfer this month, per his original structure. Let us know if you'd like to update any of your plans." I had forgotten. Tears welled in my eyes as I reread the words. He had thought of everything. Even in death, he had planned for my future, built me a staircase when I felt trapped at the bottom of a pit. And now, it was time to honor him. That fall, the Mercer Foundation was born. a grant program for young adults transitioning out of abusive households, financial assistance, mental health support, legal aid, scholarships, emergency housing, funded entirely by the last piece of my inheritance. People asked, why not use that money for yourself? And I'd smile, because they didn't understand. This was for me. For every version of me that thought no one would ever come. For every kid holding a backpack outside a house that no longer wanted them. For every broken voice finding its first scream. The grand opening of the Foundation's community space happened on a crisp October morning. I stood outside the modest brick building, surrounded by a crowd of volunteers, supporters, and a few familiar faces from the online world. Aunt Nina stood in the front row, arms crossed, eyes shining with unshed tears. My mom stood beside her, holding a tray of donated cupcakes, beaming like I'd just won the Nobel Peace Prize. I took the mic. I cleared my throat. And I told them what my father once told me before his last hospital stay. You don't have to be the loudest voice in the room. Just don't be silent when it matters most. That night, alone in my apartment, I looked out the window at the city below, its lights pulsing like stars too stubborn to burn out. I lit a single candle. Not for mourning. But for gratitude. For survival. For second chances. For freedom. The kind I never thought I'd earn. I whispered, "Thank you, Dad. I made it." And deep in my chest, I swear I felt it. A quiet reply. "I always knew you would." If you're reading this, and you've ever been silenced, ignored, dismissed, or broken. If someone tried to steal your voice, your light, or your future. I want you to know this. You are not what they did to you. You are what you choose to become after. And you don't have to do it alone. You survived. Now it's your turn to rise.